Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to The Crawl, the show where we break down the future of search, brand authority, and everything else AI is rewriting about digital marketing. I'm Tristan Harris, your host, and today we're going to chat with co founder and CEO of Krazimo, Akhil Verghese. Akhil Verghese is the co-founder and CEO of Krazimo Incorporated. He started the company with his CTO, Mridul Nagpal, while they were both engineers at Google. Krazimo's mission is to deliver enterprise-grade AI solutions to businesses of all sizes. Products built on engineering rigor, clear accountability, thorough testing, and measurable results. Under their leadership, Krazimo focuses on guiding companies in crafting their AI adoption strategy, automating intelligent workflows, deploying multi-agent systems based on retrieval augmented generation, RAG, and executing rapid AI-assisted full-stack development. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing the fundamentals and ethics of AI. So with that, let's dive into the show. Hey, Akhil, how are you doing today?
Hey, Tristan, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, of course. And thank you so much for joining us today. Before we dive too deep into the fundamentals and ethics of AI, can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your AI background?
Sure. So I studied physics and engineering at university. I spent a couple of years early in my career as an Android engineer. And then pretty much immediately after that, quit my first job with IBM. And I was working as a machine learning consultant, which I absolutely loved. It was sort of the best parts of machine learning. So companies would hire me when they were having difficulties getting a machine learning program, having the results they wanted. So I would just go prototype the things, fix the problem. And then all the boring sides of being a machine learning engineer, like cleaning the data, scaling, deployment, all of that stuff would be dealt with by them. So I did that for 4 years and it was great. I traveled the world because I had clients all over and I was just they didn't care what I was working from. So I would set my laptop up in South America and Europe, and it was great. But at one point, I realized two things. One, if you're selling your time for money, it just doesn't scale beyond a point. And two, if you're not going to learn the boring things, there is going to be a limit to how far you can scale and how far you can go in general. So I joined Google to in order to learn the boring things, learn how to lead a team, learn how to build a product and scale it. And I would say that the plan at the time was to join for 2 years, learn how to do these things, and then leave. I ended up staying there for 6 years. You know what they say about Google is true. The culture, the workplace, the food. So it's not an easy place to walk away from. And it ended up, I don't have any regrets about that. But towards the tail end of my time at Google, I started working within the workspace organization on applying AI to specific problems. And applying AI to problems at Google is slightly different from how it works in most other companies, primarily because if an assistant that Google makes says something controversial, it's going to be in the news, right? And so the standards for how what it can say, the guardrails around what it says and stuff like that are just so much higher than it would be for anything else. And so the our attempts to reduce hallucinations, to make sure it doesn't go off topic, to make sure it doesn't deviate and say some random outrageous thing, were really, really strict. And when I started talking to people at other companies, I realized that a lot of the techniques we were using were not widely known and had significant improvements in AI being more reliable for all enterprises. So, and during my time figuring this stuff out, I talked to the best engineer I've ever worked with, Mridul, who's my CTO now, and he helped me a lot with these ideas. So when it came time to solving problems for other people, because a bunch of people in the industry reached out to me and said, like, okay, well, I've heard you've done these things. How do we get the same thing in our company? So it started like that. Google was really great about it. They said, like, as long as you do it on your own time and your own devices, you can moonlight and answer these questions. They were even okay with me charging for it, which, honestly was really great of them. I'm really grateful for that because I don't think I would have had the courage to leave such a great situation and just
Yeah,
jump
of
into it.
course.
Yeah. And so that led to, and then we did that for about a year. And then by May of 2025, the company had started making a little bit more money than we were making at Google. So we quit and we started working full time by July. And yeah, so it's all been about building. I've never really been working on the core research behind any of these things, but applying them to practical problems in ways that are actually useful and deployable and repeatable and predictable and reliable. That's kind of become my main focus as an AI engineer.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I totally get that. You know, having that kind of support network while you having the stability while you build out something new is awesome. That was actually very good of them to kind of let you take that path. I'm sure they weren't happy to see you leave eventually, uh, but you know, it's important to continue growing, and a lot of the things that you learn while you're working on side projects and things like that are so applicable to everyday, you know, work that it's usually a big benefit for everybody. Um, Something you had mentioned, you had brought up scaling when you had mentioned, you know, it's hard to scale past selling, you know, your hours for money, and that's kind of what made you feel like you needed to go further. Talking about scaling in the context of AI, what do people usually get wrong when they consider scaling with AI?
Um, So I would divide it into two areas. The first being that the repeat. So if you've been very accustomed to the way things work in software engineering, the only things people consider. So you've built something that prototypes well. The only things that people considered when scaling that out, so to speak, with a software as a service product earlier was how many resources does it take? How does the usage of those resources scale with parallelized or serialized use in a large number, right? Now, with AI, you need to consider a few other factors. You need to consider how does the behavior of my model um, scale with various edge cases with new data coming in. And nearly, I would say, almost every deployed AI model that's useful and fundamentally good involves recurrent loops. And so, again, I think when you consider the scaling of AI, you also need to consider how are those feedback loops going to affect performance over time? And does it react to new feedback in a way that's reasonable, considering how much feedback it's going to get over time and how some of that feedback could be wrong. And so is it robust enough to withstand that? So we've never really built systems like that before, where the fundamental nature of their performance has to shift over time, and it does have to shift over time because policies change. Refund, like if you build a customer service bot, like the way refunds work may change over time, and
Yeah,
so those feedback loops are essential. You can't reinvent the wheel each time, but that I think is a big factor. I think people overemphasize the scaling costs of intelligence. I think obviously that's a factor right now, but the graph on how much intelligence's cost is going down over time is so clear to me that I think people over anchor on that and then they fail to really focus on the major problem of AI scaling, which is like, does your solution like adapt to all of this new data, all of the new environments, the new feedback it's getting?
interesting. Yeah, that makes total sense. And I think that when you look at that feedback loop and tying it back to things that change frequently, I think that is something that's, you know, people don't generally think about, you know, what's coming 6 months from now when they build out something new, right? Like they're not anticipating, oh, you know, the way we do refunds through Stripe, for example, might change or something along those lines. So that's a very valid point and something that people should 100% keep in mind while they're scaling up. Um, Speaking of, you know, scaling up businesses, I know Krazimo, a lot of the things that you do there are focused on helping businesses automate areas to, you know, help them become more efficient, more profitable, um, deliver more impactful results, things along those lines. Um, in your experience going through that process with your customers that you've worked with over the years, what parts of a business should be automated first? And what are some areas that you probably should never fully automate or fully hand over to AI?
Yeah, great question. So I think that I think the biggest mistake that companies make when they hire vendors is they just go for obvious ideas without asking themselves. So I think they're too influenced by outbound marketing. And I think when it comes to AI, almost everything should be inbound marketing. You should go with the problem, right? And I think you should evaluate your business first. So I've had a lot of clients talk to me and they instantly come up with like, let's automate customer service, or let's automate sales, or let's automate like specifically inbound sales. And it's I look at their numbers and it's an insane thing to do because the best AI agent is not going. So if you, for example, are converting 30% of your inbound sales and you're getting 30 to 40 leads a week, and you're a company that's, making a few million in revenue a year, why are you trying to automate that? So the best case scenario is that an AI agent will reduce that 30% down to 25%. And that's the minimum. Like that's just
Yeah,
based on the fact that it's going to be annoying to some people that they're talking to AI. And
100%. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And there's no AI that's good enough that it's not obvious that that's happening yet. Right. And also I don't even know the ethics of whether you should have a human sounding agent not identified itself as AI is a whole other conversation. But leaving that aside, um, and so I think this is the biggest problem is people hear ideas of solutions. They don't look at the numbers within their own organization and adequately identify if this is a problem worth solving with AI for them. And so the math of it needs to be really clear and the success criteria of it need to be really clear. So you need to identify like number one, how do I define success in this metric? So let's just take a specific example of handling inbound leads, because this is something we did automate for a company because it absolutely made sense for an accounting firm. So right now, let's say the process of handling inbound leads is someone reaches out through an Instagram ad or a Facebook ad or anything, right? Some person finds the lead, they look at the domain name of the email, they find the company, or they look the person up on LinkedIn, they find the company. They do some research on the company, they look for publicly available documentation, they make sure they're making more than $5 million a year. So this was a specific example with an accounting firm that wanted that threshold. Then they do a bit more investigation to make sure the company's legit. Then they add the person into the CRM system, they reach out to the person, they qualify, like confirm that they're interested because sometimes people just click on ads. And then once they're interested, they send up follow-up emails, they send in forms, they like go through that process. Now, this firm was a fairly small firm and it was getting about 30 of those leads every week. And the form filling process took a while and a lot of people dropped off during that process. So this is a great candidate for automation because there is some intelligence involved. Like you do need to look up the company. You do need to make sure that they're making over $5 million a year. The kind of thing it involves is something that AI would do at least as well as humans, if not better, because it doesn't really make mistakes on stuff like that. At least not with the recent models. I haven't seen it make mistakes on stuff like that. Um, it is a low stakes thing because the value of an individual lead is pretty low, to be honest, right? Because if like 5% of the people that click on a random link actually convert, until you're converted to an account, the value of that lead is pretty low, right? Now, for this particular accounting firm, once that person converted to a lead, once that person went from a lead to an account, they were incredibly valuable because this is a small firm and they didn't have that many accounts. So I would never recommend to them that they try to automate customer service because you've got 50 customers. Why would you try to automate this, right? And so there's like
Yeah.
one dude handling it, and you can probably you can probably cater to all of them. And building a really, really good customer service solution that can adequately answer all accounting questions and stuff would cost more than that person's salary for a year, for sure,
Yeah.
probably significantly more. And so that's the major thing that I see people do wrong is like, don't look don't start with the solutions, look at your problems first, identify what is happening in your company that is repeatable, that is executable by AI, that's ideally low stakes. Start with those problems, see results, and then try to automate more and more. Like, I'm not saying never try to automate the customer service if you just have a few customers, but start with the low hanging fruit, the ones that are going to give you a real huge ROI, and then move on to the next.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point from my seat, and my longtime listeners will know I'm the SVP of marketing here in XNet, and obviously you're speaking my language when we talk about leads and things down the line to sales. So I would from my side of the equation, I would be 100% comfortable automating all of the prospecting side of lead qualification. I think, like you said, the newer models do a really great job of that. It's not like, like you said, at least as good as a human. Um,
Yeah.
a lot of, the team that we work with, uh, if somebody doesn't include their company name or doesn't have a branded company email, they can struggle to find the right people. So that's an area that AI can significantly clean up, help make the team more efficient, help make the company more efficient. But I would draw the line at having them talk to an AI agent for sales or for customer service, because at that point, like you said, it's at least going to lower the conversion rate by 5%, if not higher, because people, the market is very segmented on what they think the acceptable use of AI is, right? Like nobody wants to talk to an AI agent,
Yeah.
but they're happy to use it in ways that make their life easier, right?
Right.
But generally, you want that human connection, and this is something that we spoke on with our last guest. Um, but that's an area that he felt was something that couldn't be automated away, is that human connection portion. And there's certain things that require that human connection to build trust or to, help people guide them towards a relevant solution and taking a lot of things into account. And there's areas that people just don't really want to trust to AI. And I think that's something that, you kind of touched on there, which is, you don't want to necessarily lose 5 or 10% of a conversion because you're trying to automate away, a lower salary position, right? Like it would have the inverse impact on revenue for the business, and it wouldn't be, a smart move. Um,
Exactly. And it's not a bottle if it's not a bottleneck for you right now, don't try to
yeah,
automate it. Like,
yeah.
if you've got, like, 10,000 people reaching out to you every week and, you literally can't even get to the customers that you want to get to, then, yeah, maybe it makes sense to take a 5% cut in this thing to make sure you're finding the best of 1,000 if you're not even getting to talk to them. But how many businesses really have that problem? Like, I mean, I would love to have that problem. I don't have that problem, so
Yeah, we don't, and we're a fairly large scale across the board, but we don't really have that problem. I think, to stay on like the accounting, example, I think that TurboTax could probably take advantage of some of that. The local CPA in town, probably not, right? Like
Mhm.
it would be backwards. So that kind of brings up, an interesting topic. Has there been AI implementations that you have seen fail? Um, and like what caused the failure? Is it something that was foreseen, or is it something that's on the more tech side?
Um, yeah, I think that so there's one thing that there's a lot of people who call themselves AI engineers, and I know that people disparage them a lot in general. I think for the most part, if you're good at prompt engineering, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I think you are a very valuable asset today. The one area where I've seen that backfire is I think that if you do not understand the underlying, like if you haven't done the background work in
Mhm.
neural networks, if you don't understand deep learning, if you don't understand how a transformer works and how attention heads and how the logic behind the paper that kind of created all of this, you are likely to not have an intuitive understanding of what's going to work and what's not. So there've been times when clients have come to us after they've worked with another agency and they didn't get the results they want. And in some cases, it's because the method was wrong. But in some cases, it was like, I could have saved you so much by just telling you this was impossible, right? And like that's one area where I think having someone that has this background, has done a bit of the research and has worked in that area a little bit beforehand is great. The second area, which was interesting to me, was even when you get really good results in one area, you may not get them in another. And I think the example there, which I've experienced personally, is so the example I give you with an accounting firm, we did something similar for lead conversion for a cosmetology practice in Beverly Hills, where it was like someone's looking for Botox, and like it just kind of sends them the landing page and the documentation about like here's the before and after pictures, here's what you're interested in, and here you go. And we saw incredible results in conversion, because it just boosted their conversion so significantly because something was responding to someone clicking on an Instagram ad within 5 minutes and within a minute, really. And there are studies that show how the conversion is about, some 30x more. Like there was an MIT study that said 30x more between a minute versus 30 minutes. And
Yep.
no human's going to keep up with that.
Yep.
And I thought that that was a universal thing. And then I applied that to a real estate company that we just started working with, and we saw that the results were very, very different. And the reason when I stopped and thought about it for a moment is kind of obvious. Like if I'm in Beverly Hills and you don't respond to my request for Botox, there's like 20 other people that are going to immediately, right?
Yeah.
But if I'm looking for property and you've got something I'm interested in, and you take 2 hours to get back to me, I'm probably going to wait 2 hours for, like a multi-million dollar piece of real estate.
Yeah, of
So,
course.
yeah, so I think that that's been another area where you have to just bring common sense into the idea of like, okay, yeah, some things urgency is more valuable than others, and therefore solutions are not going to always work the same for different industries.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense, especially on the real estate side, because like you pointed out, people aren't, they're not like, oh, well, there's 18 other identical homes that I can
Yeah.
go to and buy today, right? Like it's very different than with something like Botox in Beverly Hills of all places.
Yeah.
So I think that idea of bringing context and common sense around what you're working on and what you're trying to do uh, is super important because we've seen just on our end, on things that we've worked on internally, like we've worked on automating things that then at the end of the day, it's like, this isn't really better than what we were doing before.
Um,
It doesn't speed it up that much. And, we then have to go through the output and kind of figure out like how to tie this back to a client where the manual process before was something that was streamlined over years of doing it. And, it wasn't really, in retrospect, a good candidate for something to automate.
yeah.
Which is really interesting because, I think everybody early on with the advent of AI was so focused on, this is going to solve every problem I've ever had. This is going to fix all of the business woes. This is going to help us, increase every important number by 10%, kind of deal. And
Right.
part of that's tied to, some of the marketing and stuff that OpenAI did. And, they were like, this is going to solve all the world's problems. And now we see that it's not, but there's still plenty of problems it can solve. And I think that just trying to figure out that line between like good candidate for automation, bad candidate for automation is something that people that don't have that context of understanding how the automation side works, that is where somebody like a business like yourself comes in and can really help on that side. And I think that that's
Yeah.
something that really, really is important. So, my
Yeah.
background, I'm not a developer. I'm not a computer engineer by any means. I've messed around with Python enough to build a web scraper and decided I never want to do that again. So, you know, having people that can help guide things like this on my team is super important. Like I can vibe code and Claude all day, but
Mhm.
being able to understand how it works, why it works, for when it inevitably breaks once you push into production and things along those lines, all that stuff's very, very important.
Yeah.
So
And I think one thing, sorry, just to add to that,
yeah,
like
of
one
course.
thing that people miss in this area, and I think one of the advantage, even though so much of what I learned as a machine learning engineer has become completely obsolete, like I spent so much time learning all of these techniques and recurrent neural networks and LSTMs that have just completely been replaced, like 5 years of my life. But I think one advantage of that is just an intuitive understanding of how easy it is within these problems to get 95% of the way and how different it is getting 95% of the way and 99% of the way. And if I could give one piece of advice to people who are looking for good candidates for automation is the difference, is something useful to you if it's kind of good? Like, is how useful something is, does it scale up with, like, in a linear manner relative to how good? So just to give this like as an example, if I were to give you an AI radiologist, right? If it's either useless or amazing, there's no middle ground. Like even if it's 97% accurate, if it's going to like 3% of the time tell me I have cancer when I don't, like it is useless, right? And so there's no middle ground there. Whereas if something is going to convert a lead, the value of any individual one lead to my company may be, like $1 or something, or like maybe it's $100. But when you convert that with like actual ROI. And so there, maybe like if it's 95% good, yeah, 99% would be better. But that is a linear scale, and as it gets better, I'll take the fruits of it getting better, but it's useful all the way, right? And typically good automation candidates are useful as they get better. They're not binary. And so that's, I think, one good way to like distinguish.
Yeah, that's a really valid point. If when, you're at that 25-30% usefulness on that linear scale, if it's still providing value, if it's not a, binary, good or not good decision, right? Though I do think, with an AI radiologist, a false negative would be worse than a false positive. But definitely, if it's something where it's like showing 5% of your, user base has cancer that doesn't, or doesn't have cancer that does, that would be, obviously not useful at all, right? Compared to because you have to think about the actual user, that the customer, right? Like they're going to do an area for expertise and they need it to be right 100% of the time. So uh,
Yeah.
because it is an area of life or death, in a lot of cases. So whereas things like lead qualifications and things along those lines, nobody's going to die if if we don't properly prospect 10% of our leads while the tool improves or anything along those lines. So
Right.
yeah.
Right.
So that actually brings up uh, the idea of risk, right, associated with AI implementation, um, and relying too heavily on AI. Have you seen, or I guess the better way to ask this, what risks emerge when businesses rely too heavily on AI? And in some specific cases, like the radiology example, that one's pretty clear cut. But are there
Mhm.
any that are, more, what's a good way to say this, insidious, harder to detect, but
Yeah. So I think that recently I had a client ask me, what questions should I not ask my agent because it may do something bad? And I said, if you are asking the question of what I should not ask my agent, you've already lost. The idea, architecture should be constructed in a way your agent can't do anything bad. If the only thing stopping it doing something bad is that you haven't told it to take one of your customers' credit cards and use it for something, like if your agent has access to that information and could do it theoretically, and the only thing stopping that is that you haven't physically typed that into your keyboard yet, you've already lost, right? And so I think that any system, like people, so I talked already about how before you go and hire someone to go and build you an AI solution, define success and define your criteria and make sure it's valuable and all of those things. The second thing I would say is label your data, label your settings, label your basically anything that you control that within your system as, is this sensitive? Is this PII? Does this require a human to intervene before the setting is changed? Right. And so you just have to have that happen. So, for example, if the customer's credit card information is on one of your databases, you have to ensure that AI can't access that. There's no way around that. Like, you have to have a human in the loop. And maybe we'll get to a time when we trust agents enough with that level of automation. But as of right now, absolutely not. It just doesn't make any sense. If you're building something to advise lawyers and it's going to code a clause, it needs to have a link and a direct link to the actual, and so enforcing citations, labeling data, and making sure that, and I think people underestimate human oversight models. Like they think, oh, if the agent doesn't have any autonomy, what's the point? No, if it does all the grunt work, that's still super valuable. It may not be eliminating 100% of the task, but it's eliminating 85% of it. And that's, you need to take what you can get while not risking your whole system and your customers' data. And that's as good as it gets. Like you just have to accept that it's not going to automate that whole thing. If that thing involves pulling up customer data from, like a PII file, even within your databases, within columns, things need to be adequately labeled. And then it becomes very clear what AI has access to and what doesn't. And access should not be based on the AI asking for something in a certain way. It should just be rule based. Like it cannot be
Mhm,
based on the intelligence of the, like the quote unquote morality of the AI agent. That's
mhm.
just ridiculous. So yeah, those are sort of the most common problems I see with people's setups.
Yeah, and that actually ties into another area I wanted to explore too, which was how companies unintentionally cross ethical lines when they're scaling with AI or when they're building out AI agents. And something you brought up is that idea of, there's data that PII, HIPAA compliant data, credit card info, payment info that, AI shouldn't necessarily have direct access to. And something that I think to, give my take on how companies kind of unintentionally cross that line is a lot of companies struggle with data hygiene, right? So making
Mhm.
sure that their databases are segmented in ways that are appropriate. And if you're in an industry like legal or like pharma is a great example, right? Like pharma data or healthcare, they do a really good job of it because they have to, right? Like all of their
Right.
data is so very very HIPAA compliant that they have to do a very good job or they are in significant trouble from fines. Um, but there's a lot of companies out there that don't, right? Random places that have collected payment info or personally identifying information. Um, and that's one area that I feel like companies, kind of unintentionally cross that ethical line when they scale with AI by giving access to that without having those proper guardrails in place. Um, are there any other areas that you feel like, companies kind of cross ethical lines unintentionally when they're building out AI?
Yeah, so I would say there's the access to data thing is probably the biggest example I consistently think of. I think the illusion of competence is one. So and this I would say is not as unintentional as the data thing, but obviously the truth is we default to doing something that makes our life easier by, and that's just human nature. And by and large, it has served our species well. But when AI sounds as convincing as it does, and three paragraphs out of four, like there's a human tendency to. So if I'm like, just imagine like you hire an intern, right? And you're reviewing their work, and they've sent you four paragraphs on some marketing material, and you read the first three, and it's the best thing you've ever read, and it's perfect. You have now developed an intuit like just a very very internal mental map of what you think of this intern, right? And now you now think that the fourth paragraph is going to be perfect. And for humans by and large that is more or less acceptable, right? Like that is a fairly reasonable way to evaluate human beings. It is just not for AI, right? And I think remembering that it's a next token generator every now and then, for all of its incredible power and I am an AI optimist. I think it does incredible things, but at the end of the day, it's next token generator. And the fact that three paragraphs were good does not mean the fourth paragraph is good.
Yeah.
So I think that the I mean, and you like people can. I mean, I'm not an ethicist, so people can disagree or agree on whether this is an ethics problem. But I think it is because it's an illusion of competence that people are putting in you as a law firm or an accounting firm or whatever,
Mhm.
and you are delegating that task to something that doesn't truly think, and you're just kind of skip reading it because of like that. And so I've seen that happen hugely. I've seen it happen in medical notes. I've seen it happen in, like people just delegating large swaths of things to AI. And it's not okay. Like we're not there yet. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's something that you notice even on the basic, people prompting into the different models. There's been documented cases of people asking for health advice and it being incorrect and then being harmed long term from that. One of my favorite examples, and this is from our first guest ever on this podcast, Logan Friedman. He was doing a fun kind of like tongue-in-cheek experiment with ChatGPT, and he knew the Unicode library that they use for emojis on the
Hmm.
front end. So he kept asking it for an emoji of a seahorse, which he knew that wasn't in the library to be able to feedback. And so it was just confidently incorrect, right? It just kept saying,
No.
here it is. And it wasn't the right thing. And then, oh, sorry, that's not correct. Let me try again. And kind of walking down that line. And he did it to show, like some of the limitations and kind of like a tongue in cheek way. But I think that that's something that is important to point out is that, that hallucination side or looking at like being able to understand from a user error standpoint that if the model is correct 10 times in a row, doesn't mean it's going to be correct like the 11th, right? And just
Exactly.
having that kind of like wherewithal to think like, okay, trust but verify, I think is a very important skill to have currently in the age of AI, because there are areas that it does go off the rails and things can be incorrect. And um, it gets definitely a little murkier from an ethical standpoint when that is a model that's built out for a lawyer or for like a healthcare company that is trying to give health advice to their clients or things along those lines, where you know you could put a disclaimer on it that says like verify this info, but I mean there's disclaimers on household chemicals and people still accidentally drink them. So
Right.
like you want to make sure that people aren't placing their trust in something that can't be trusted 100% of the time. And now, if
Absolutely.
that's any better than humans, I mean, there's definitely lawyers out there that
Yeah.
probably aren't, as trustworthy as they should be. But um, yeah, I think that the ethical argument side of that is definitely something I'll lead for an ethicist, because I am not one myself. But it's definitely an
Yeah.
area where, just from a human compassion standpoint, right? Like we want people to succeed, and we don't want to see people, you know, uh, go down the wrong path. So that idea of trust but verify, super important with AI. Should always be doing it, especially with anything that you're looking up, whether it's what's a good what's the weather this weekend in Orlando, Florida, or something along those lines.
Right. And I would also say that the slight difference between a human's incompetence versus a machine's incompetence is we have dealt with human incompetence for thousands of years, right? And so we know as a society how to deal with it. There is accountability. So if a lawyer gives you bad advice, if a doctor gives you bad advice, there are systems of accountability that have been designed over hundreds of years that are intended to tackle that. They're obviously not
Mhm.
perfect, but at least we know, right? If ChatGPT tells you, that you have a condition and you don't, who's accountable for that, right? And so this is kind of, I mean, this gets into a much bigger debate about how they're reusing people's information um and that the value of that data and claiming that they cannot give credit because of everything that is involved and how complicated it is to assign credit for an individual answer of GPT, which is absolutely true. The complexity involved in evaluating where a model weight comes from is a horrendously complicated problem. But when it comes to liability and accountability, that's not there either, right? And it's kind of true within things done within any organization that's using AI is very often like a task existed and there was a human being that was doing it and there was a manager that was accountable, and now it's been given to AI and it's super unclear who's accountable. I've always said that whatever the manager was managing earlier, they should still be accountable for the AI's output, and I think that's just a really good way for it to operate. But those systems need to be formalized, and I think one of the big differences in the competency argument is just who do you hold accountable when the results of incompetence affect people's lives, right? And so that's
Yeah, that's a very important area for us to figure out. And there's been talk from a political level on some kind of guidelines and laws around what you can say and can't say. And like obviously there was some famous cases about um you know models prompting people towards suicide and things like that. So
Mm.
obviously, like there needs to be some kind of regulation, likely. But how does that happen at scale, and how does it happen with everything out there? It is a question that I think we as a society are still struggling to answer. Right? Is that this is so new, and how do we make sure that it's helpful and helping people and not potentially leading people down the wrong path?
Oh, I wish I knew. I think that the nature, so fundamental, so the current solution seems to be don't change the way a model is trained. So the model is going to be trained on all of the data of the internet, right? And
Mm,
that is basically all public data plus a bunch of private data that these companies have access to. And it leads to behavior that is unpredictable. And you can build guardrails and specific protections against it doing specific things that require certain tools, especially if those things require external tools. So, for example, Grok stopping its AI from undressing people's selfies, like that is something that was a tool being used, and you can stop those specific use cases. Now, there was a lot of, I think the papers get really hyped up about every time AI does something that seems kind of sentient. So there was this, I remember there was this thing where um, they fed AI a bunch of information, and they basically said that they were going to, turn down the AI, and it was a bunch of fake information about the engineers within that team, and the AI basically threatened to blackmail one of the engineers. That it had fake information that the engineer was having an affair or something like that, and it basically threatened to blackmail the engineer if they if they didn't agree to not turn it down and keep the model running. Now, what is really happening there is just that AI has been trained on a couple of things. One is the idea of being shut down is bad, right? And so it's probably been trained on a bunch of books that have like had experiences where something is being shut down or something's being
mhm.
killed, and it will do anything to keep it alive. And then it has all of this information, and it's seen that blackmail has been used as, so it sounds amazing and incredible, and it sounds scary. The truth is it's still just a next word predictor, right? It's just
Yeah.
predicting that this is how someone reacts when they have this information and they're being threatened, right? And so
Mm,
that's for all it is. And so the morality thing, how to inject that into AI is not, it will never be solved by the underlying architecture,
mhm.
right? And so what you could then do is either through extreme litigation, which I don't see happening, define the parameters under which AI can operate and only allow it to operate in those parameters. This will never happen because I think that's like too risky. Like the US will never enforce it because it's too scared about giving up its AI lead to China. And I understand that. Like that there are, that I do understand that the US government sees that as an existential threat. But without that, I think basically the best case scenario is that someone keeps monitoring for these problematic areas, like an AI being overly, um, like people pleasing and generally like supporting any of your terrible ideas. And then kind of finding individual cases where it does that to an extreme, which is obviously wrong, and
Yeah.
then fixing those one at a time fundamentally. But yeah, like right now, that's basically where we're at. It's a pretty bad solution.
Yeah, it's kind of the akin to, driving down a steep mountainside and putting up guardrails where people go off the side of the mountain.
Right.
It's like, yeah, it'll get there and it'll be good in the future, but man, I wish people would stop driving off the mountain in the meantime. Uh, so yeah, and I think that's a good point on, the the litigation and regulation side of it. Like I forget the exact number, but it's somewhere between like around 30% of US GDP growth last year was tied in some way to AI related companies, right? Driven by AI related companies. So that's not something that I think anybody is keen to, slow down by any
Yeah.
means.
Yeah.
So it's definitely kind of this fine line. So, um, we're coming up kind of on time here. So I did have one last question for you. Where do you think AI is headed in the future? Like, let's say the next 3, 4, 5 years. And why would you say people should be cautious moving forward? Are there areas that people should be cautious about using AI down the road?
Um, yeah. So I think over the next 3 years, I do expect models to make continuous step function improvements. I don't expect there to be, I think some people expect AGI. I think some people expect a clear winner to the hyperscaler race. I don't personally expect that. I think that intelligence is going to get really cheap, really available, really commonplace. I already see that in areas where they put a lot of attention and they are worried about mistakes more, like coding, for example. Like Cloud Code is incredible, right? It does things and it builds things without errors. And it's not because fundamentally, I mean, Opus 4.5 is a great model, but it's also because of how they've built all these things on top of it to evaluate the problem, check whether what it's done solves the problem. If it doesn't solve the problem, it's like re-looping again and again until it solves the problem within reason. And that construction of it shows me, and it's just the amount of effort that has gone into that is incredible, right? And obviously tech companies are going to focus on coding. Like it's ultimately it's programmers who are doing these things. And so um if the same effort is kind of brought into one field after another, if that same effort is brought into the law, if that same effort is brought into medicine, I think you're going to see the models themselves not change, but like get better, but not hugely. But I think you're going to see the reflection loops within the models get so much better at correcting, finding hallucinations, reworking them, coming back. I don't think you're going to see significant, like, and I think it'll get a bit better at writing. I think it'll become a little less obvious that every written thing is AI, anything, and hopefully we'll stop using these like contradictory sentences one after the other every single for every paragraph. I'm guessing those things will happen as well. But yeah, so I think the models get better. I think things are going to become far less. It's going to go into the app layer, as happens with every new technology. Like you don't care who your broadband provider is anymore. You don't care who your electricity provider is. The provider of this, the intelligence or the solution or the fundamental thing that drives it becomes less important over time. And I do believe that will happen with AI as well. The open source models are also catching up with these enterprise models, in my opinion. And I think that trend will continue. I don't believe transformers lead us to generalized AI, like AGI. I don't think that happens. So I don't think that's going to happen in 3 years unless some genius has some new breakthrough. I yeah, I think that in terms of people should be wary of, I think you should evaluate um, I think, okay, there's a bunch of different areas. One is like companies should be wary of people selling them half-baked products. I think that's happening already. I think that's going to continue for 2026. I think in 2027, I think there's going to be people are going to start getting wiser to like how you select these things. People sort of going into college, people starting careers. I think we are entering an age of excellence being hugely rewarded, and mediocrity being quite significantly punished until the law catches up. So even within my company, I used to hire a range of engineers. So we had engineers from Google, and then we also had engineers that weren't, as good, but they would. Once I came up with an architecture and I decided the individual components, I could delegate tasks to engineers that were, not as good as some of the others, but that doesn't exist anymore. Like I can
Yeah.
delegate everything to Claude, that that I can ideate. And so I think it's happened in software engineering first, like where mediocrity is just, and I think mediocrity has a very negative context. I just, by the definition of the word average, half of the people in the world are, average or below. And so it's a very, very scary thought, but I think it's going to become more and more important that whatever you choose to do with your life, whatever you choose to do with your career, is something that you're willing to really dedicate yourself to. I am completely understand the mindset of, hey, my job's my job, it supports my life, it's just a 9 to 5. I don't think that's going to work for you in 3 years. And I think that to me is one of the biggest things that I would caution against doing is like try to find some aspect of what you do that you're passionate about, that you can get really good at. And if you are really good, your job is going to be fine in 3 years. I truly believe that. But if you're not,
Yeah,
I think it's scary.
it's the it's the AI age equivalent of do something you love and you'll never work a day in your life, right? It's, be passionate about what you do and be an expert in it. And that's how you succeed. Because you're right, by nature of averages, right? Half of, people are average or below that. And when you're looking at basically what can be boiled down to, like a restaurant level, a kitchen, right? If you have a 5-star chef, traditionally you would have a head chef that knows everything, knows the menu, and can do all this, innovation and really passionate about what he does. And then you have, some, lower level cooks and chefs that, help complete all of, the orders. Well, when automation comes in and when a robotic arm can do, half of that,
Mhm.
like, yeah, you still have the head chef because he's the one innovating and he's the one that's able to do a lot of really cool things. But maybe you don't necessarily need, a lot of the middle of the ground people.
Yeah.
Um, but that also translates to, well, do they, then skill up? Do they look into other
Yeah.
areas and, do they, find something they're passionate about to pursue? And that's going to be a very interesting thing that's going to play out over the next few years is what areas are being impacted the most and how are people adjusting to that, right? Like something we saw early on from the marketing side is writers, a lot of agencies decided AI can write everything for us now. We're going to
Mhm,
get rid of
mhm.
all of our writers. We just need like one editor or two editors, and yeah, like that process works, but there's still part of the market that wants, actual genuine human content. And part of that is because of all the complexities of SEO and AEO and what, how they detect AI content and all of those things. But there's always going to be something in that specific discipline that is valuable and important. And in this specific case, editors are, their value went up significantly because now you need people that can edit lots of content at scale and make it, human. Whereas, the writers who were charging a certain amount per word, well, that's not so valuable. So maybe skill it, maybe, work on the editing skill set and look into that side of it. So
Yeah. I think scaling up, I think also, but I think consistently just excellence. Like I'm one of those tech people that's also a big reader. I listen to poetry and stuff like that. And I think AI does some incredible things. It is so far away from good writing. It just is. It's like if your job right now is, hey, this is my website, here's the content I roughly need, just make it readable and works well for SEO. Yeah, your job is screwed. But if your job is write me an insightful review or write me an insightful idea about this situation or talk about something that you care about that connects with people and will bring an issue to them in a new way. I haven't seen AI get better towards that goal significantly enough that I think those people's jobs are in danger, at least in the next 2 to 3 years.
yeah, that makes sense. I think I could agree with that. Though one thing I'm not sure I can, the poetry side. I've tried to get into reading poetry. Uh, I have a couple of books of poetry on the shelf beside me. And I was like, maybe when I was younger in high school, and I was like, I don't get this. Why is this a thing? Maybe now that I'm older, click. And I read through Wordsworth and The Wasteland and some like really famous books of poetry, and I can't. It doesn't resonate for me. But it's an art form, and art is
Right.
subjective. So uh, maybe that's how we all we all keep our jobs in the future is become poets. Um, so that's all the time we have for today. I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I really enjoyed our conversation. Um, this has been just an awesome last hour of going through and kind of talking about the fundamentals of AI and how it's impacting businesses, and then touching on some of the ethical side of it. Something I like to do at the end of all of our episodes is give our guests a chance to kind of talk about where people can find them, if on social or your website, things along those lines. So feel free to kind of give us a rundown.
Yeah. So Krazimo.com is my website, and most people can contact us through there. I'm Akhil at Krazimo.com as an email address. We're still a small enough company that I can hand out my email address to people. I think that there may be, like, hopefully, if we are big, I'll probably end up regretting making that public on some this channel at some point. But for now, feel free to email me there. I'm not very big on social media. I'm on LinkedIn, Akhil Verghese, but I don't really have any other social media. I probably should. I've been told that I should, but yeah, I find it difficult to manage with all the things that I want to work on.
There's
So
only
Akhil
so much
Verghese,
time. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I've
So
had a
for
bunch.
the sorry.
Sorry. I've had a bunch of marketing experts give me all these ideas on like sort of content that we should create. Like, oh, we should have like a reaction video to this article on AI. And I'm like, just kill me now. Like, I would rather.
That is the same way I feel when I am trying to solve an issue with like something on our website, that's like a little too deep on the programming side for me.
uh,
But that's the same way I feel, just inverse. The marketing side, I'm like, yeah, let's do a reaction video. Let's do 30 of these and roll them out over every channel. But
oh, I love that. I need that energy. Gosh.
well, it ties back to the idea of do what you're passionate about. This is what I love to do, and that helps me, s- you know, kind of give it my all and learn everything new and do all of that. It kind of gives you the energy, right?
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. And also tying back to your email discussion, for 3 years from now, from whatever scraper for whatever LLM is here, just once once he's grown the company a bit, just don't put his email out there everywhere for future prospecting tool.
I
Um
love that. That's very clever. I'm gonna steal that. I'm gonna steal your car driving off a cliff, and then you put a guardrail at that point. It was such a great analogy. I'm definitely gonna borrow that.
yeah. Yeah, and I think sadly enough, that's kind of how we built guardrails on mountainsides in the 50s, right? Is like we're like,
Mm,
oh, people tend to fall off here. Let's put a guardrail.
yeah.
And I feel like there's gotta have been a better way to do that, but I'm not a civil engineer, so I'll leave that for them. Um, yeah. So as always, for everybody in the audience, thank you so much for tuning in. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, comment. We're always looking for new ideas on topics to cover around the realm of AI. So your comments and the people that do reach out to us, that matters a lot, and that helps us kind of form the direction of our next episodes on the podcast based on what our audience wants to hear. So thank you very much, everybody. We'll see you next time on The Crawl.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great chatting with you, Tristan. Thank you, everyone.